What about the ancestor that was snatched from Africa? What about the ancestor who had to make that voyage across the seas? What about the ancestor who was whipped, forced into slavery, into a place that they don't know, into a foreign land in a foreign country? Like, you telling me none of the people needed help, but this little white boy, Rufus, needed help. Good morning and welcome back to my channel. So I'm sure you clicked on this video and wondering, like, Krishana, now you said that you were not reading any books in November. What happened? Well, let me tell you. I will tell you all about it. If you are new here, my name is Krishana. I am a writer of speculative fiction, sci-fi, and a reader of speculative fiction, sci-fi, contemporary, and romance. And if you're here, that means that you are ready for all of the delicious book recommendations. So thank you so much for joining me. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any videos. And hit the like button to let me know that you like the video. Okay, y'all, it is officially fall in Georgia. Y'all see I got on my hat and my vest because it's cold. And so since we are already out here, I figured I would go ahead and start listening to my book that I'm reading this month and let y'all know, give y'all the tea, the skinny. If you don't know, FX has decided to take one of Octavia Butler's books and turn it into a limited series, which is so amazing because if you know anything about Octavia Butler, she did not get her flowers when she was here with us in the physical on Earth. And as a supporter and fan of her writing and everything that she did for Black people, Black women in the speculative fiction, sci-fi, and fantasy world, like, I just really appreciate that, you know, she's finally getting her shine. Now, the show that FX is doing is about her book Kindred, which is basically about this Black woman. The book is about this Black woman in the 1970s who moves to California with her white partner and basically just starts like time traveling, getting sucked to the antebellum South, and it's just a hot mess. The movie, however, I think is not set in 1970s. It's set in a more modern time. I don't know if it's actually like 2020s, but it's definitely at least in the odds. So, I never wanted to read this book. So I have read things by Octavia Butler. I'll put them up on the screen. But I read Parable of a Sower, the one with Inanwu and Doro, and they're like time traveling, hopping through time. Oh, Earthseed, I think. Wild Seed, yes. So I read that as well. I never was interested in reading Kindred, and I'm gonna tell y'all why. I really have no desire to read anything that includes like Black trauma and Black plight. And so that means that like a lot of like books about slavery, slave trade, even if it's fictionalized, like I'm not interested in. I have no interest in romanticizing slavery. And I just think that like those movies are, you know, really made with the white gaze in mind to make white people better understand the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. And like, I've done my research and my Googles. I've read the things, watched the shows. I went to all Black schools. I went to a HBCU. Like, I promise you that content is not for me. I'm a girl who's seen Amistad as a kid and 12 Years a Slave, and I was forced to watch Roots in middle school. I never had a desire to read this book pre this. However, I think that I am going to watch the show, and I have a homegirl who I'm probably going to watch it with, and she's read the book. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to watch this show, I should read the book. Hold, please. Y'all, I'm pushing this stroller uphill, goddamn. Okay, we are going downhill. Y'all gonna have to just listen to me panting. Whatever. Judge your mama, not me. I listened to the first 2 chapters of the book yesterday, and y'all, I'm already stressed about certain parts of the book. So, number one, we are not even that far in the book, and the Black woman Dana, who's the main character, her white partner is already gaslighting her, and I don't got time for that. Like, she disappears, he sees her vanish, and it's basically like, not believing her story about why she vanished and where she went when she was gone. And it's like, you literally saw her, like you reached out to try to touch her and you saw her vanish before your eyes, but yet you are not willing to like believe where she went. I think that's bullshit and just like typical gaslighting, and like white microaggressions. Like, sis don't deserve that. Like, she was just fighting for her life in the antebellum South, and yet, you know, you won't be a dick about it. So the story starts off in a really interesting place. I think Octavia Butler does a really good job of like getting us into the action quickly, because sis is in the hospital and had to have her fucking arm amputated. Like, what the fuck? And I just feel like if I woke up in the goddamn hospital and my arm was missing, I'm cussing somebody the fuck out. And I actually think that Dana handles it really well, considering the fact that her fucking arm is missing. Then on top of that, she has to spend time not like actually like dealing with her PTSD of missing a limb and continuously being sucked into the antebellum South, but she has to then defend her white husband to these fucking racist police officers who think that he's the one who hurt her. And it's like, sis don't deserve this. I think that Octavia Butler also does a really good job at like scene setting and explaining like what the very first time the experience was when Dana disappeared, and then the second time kind of giving us some more background and explaining about like what's happening. Octavia Butler in general just does a really good job at world building and like making it very believable. And even though that is like, you know, magical realism, so a lot of it is set in the, you know, in our current modern systems, the way that magic is interplayed, she just does a good job at it. I've not gotten that far. We're gonna kind of see where the story goes. My plan is to be done reading this before the show comes out, which I think is on December 13th. All right, y'all. Peace. Hey y'all, I am still using my front-facing camera, so if this footage is not super clear, I'm sorry, but I am still listening to Kindred by Octavia Butler, and I had a thought and figured I would give you a little rant while I do my skincare. So just got the shower, went for the walk that y'all saw earlier, and figured I would do my skincare on camera while we chat. So I'm gonna start off with, so I already washed my face actually. So I used the Tatcha rice water to cleanse my face. I've been using this one for about like 2 months. I was definitely a girly that before this used to use Dove soap on my face. I know somebody is sitting there gagging like, how could you do that? But I have very, very sensitive skin. And so over the years, I would try to use different things and would always have an issue. Over the years, I would try different things on my skin and I would always break out immediately. And so I was one of those people, like, if it's not broke, don't fix it, and really got scared to try different products. So I never did. The next thing I'm going to use is my essence, which is going to be the Fenty Skin Fat Water Toner. Let's get into the rant while we do this. So I'm on like chapter 4, I guess, of Kindred, and basically the protagonist Dana finally understands and realizes where she is, and she's in Maryland. And I thought that was so funny because at first I thought maybe she was like in Georgia or like South Carolina, because it's obviously set in antebellum South, but sis is in Maryland, and me and my husband get into arguments about this all the time. So if you don't know, I'm from Baltimore, born and raised, which is in Maryland. And me and my husband get into arguments all the time about this because he does not believe that Maryland is the South. And I always tell him, like, well, one, the Mason-Dixon line runs through Maryland. So obviously the way you define the South is anything below the Mason-Dixon line, which means that Maryland is below the Mason-Dixon line. And then two, there was slavery there, which like inherently is a indicator of where the South was. But anyway, he don't believe me. So I finished that. The next thing that I'm going to put on my face, if you have ever been to a cosmetic store, so if you live near a Tinger outlet, please check out the cosmetic store. So a lot of the times at outlets, you are actually just getting like a lower tier brand of the brand you're looking for. So like, for example, I worked at Ann Taylor all through college, and Ann Taylor has a factory store. The factory store stuff is not the same stuff out of the store. Like, it's actually a completely different brand. The quality is not as good. Like, so I'm never here for factory stores, but some places actually are just like overstock. And so the cosmetic store is overstocked for like Estee Lauder. So that Estee Lauder, Clinique, MAC, like brands that you will want to shop at, and it's just overstock. Oh, and so like also all the brands that they own. So for example, Tom Ford is a Estee Lauder brand. So like this Lost Cherry, got this for like $100 there because it's overstock. So that means it came from a store somewhere that had too much product. And so I did not pay full price for these. Like I didn't pay full price for them. So whenever you go and if you spend over a certain amount of money, they give you a bunch of free stuff. And so I got some Estee Lauder products from them, and more specifically this like super pomegranate line from them. And they have a mask, which I'm not going to show because it's a nighttime mask, but that mask is amazing, beautiful. So this is the AM and PM stuff. This is the Radiant Energy Lotion and Intense Mist, but I'm going to put this on next. Sis is in Maryland, and for whatever reason, like I don't understand why this is such a contentious subject about whether or not Maryland is the South, because like, one, is it Harriet Tubman or Sojourner Truth? I'm so sorry, y'all. I don't put on the screen which one it is, but one of them was like enslaved in Eastern Maryland. I think it maybe is Harriet Tubman. Hope I'm not lying. But one or two of them was enslaved in Eastern Maryland. Like some of your fave like people who were like against slavery are from there. And I just think that it's so weird that like, you know, it's a thing that he's gonna go back and forth with me on about whether or not like Maryland is the South, when clearly like Octavia Butler agrees. Next I'm gonna use this Glow Recipe plum. I think there's this thought process that like slavery was worse in some areas, and there definitely was like back-breaking slavery in certain places, right? Like so one, let's like set the ground that like slavery was a piece of shit everywhere. Like white people during that time was mad foul for like enslaving people, and also the people who sat back and did nothing while people were enslaved, who like allowed it to happen even if you didn't own slaves, like y'all was foul too. And there's definitely some types of like slavery that depending on the crop that you were having to harvest or being forced to harvest, that was worse. So like some places it was tobacco, some places it was cotton, some places it was rice, indigo, other things, right? So next I'm going to use the Milky Lotion by Estee Lauder. So that came with the set. There's definitely like differences. And if you, to the point of earlier when I was talking about the show by Misha Green, Underground, like when the mother gets sold to the plantation in South Carolina, where it's a rice plantation, like that was definitely like a different kind of wild back-breaking work than the cotton that was being picked, because you're like literally wading in water. And like my family on my dad's side, my paternal family is from Schuylerville, and our Gullah Geechee and are from South Carolina. And so like I definitely empathize with that a lot. A little eye serum, so I've been using this Lancome serum. But it's just like, I don't know, I just think it's such a piss poor argument to like basically say that like Maryland is not the South, because it gives South. Like if it wasn't the South, why are there sundown towns in Maryland? Why are there places that people should not go? Why are there like little hick towns and backwards ass places? Like even places like Annapolis, like I ain't really trying to be in certain places in Maryland too late. If I'm keeping it a buck, I ain't gonna lie, I'm not gonna hold you. Next I'm gonna go in with the glow stick. It's just easy. A lot of the times I use Black Girl sunscreen, which you can get at a Target or off their website, which I love. But sometimes like this is easier, especially if I'm not going anywhere, but just want to make sure that I have like sunscreen on. And so I was a reporter. I used to work for the Baltimore Sun. And when I worked for the Baltimore Sun, they sent my black ass out to Harford County and then to Carroll County, because the Baltimore Sun and Tribune was fucking buying up all of the local newspapers in those places. And so I actually did a program that the Baltimore Sun used to have for high school students, where on Saturdays you would come and meet with journalists of color, and they would basically show you the ropes of journalism. You would get some bylines, and then later when I was in undergrad, I interned there and then later worked there. They would not hire me for their main like Baltimore City office. They shipped my ass out to Harford County and then to Carroll County, which are north, east and northwest of Baltimore. And when I tell you, like, it's giving racist. It's giving the South. It's giving Georgia. It's giving South Carolina. It's giving Florida up there. So I don't know why there's this like misconception that like just because you're in Maryland that it's not still the South. Like the facts is just the facts. I also think it's funny. Okay, y'all don't think it's funny that of all of the books that they could have made a show about that was Octavia Butler's, that was written by Octavia Butler and adapted for one of her books, they chose one about slavery. It's like, it's not given. Anyway, that's it, y'all. That's the end of my rant. I promise. I'm done. I appreciate. All right, I'll catch y'all in the next video. Peace, y'all. A book like Kindred is aimed at telling like a more complete narrative about the atrocities that Black people faced during the time of enslavement in America. And not just enslaved people, because it showed how quickly somebody could go from being considered a free person during that era to very quickly being seen as a commodity and forced into slavery. Because that didn't just happen to our main character, Dana, it also happened to another character in the story, Alice, as well, who was born free during the time period and still was forced into chattel slavery. And in a time period of the present where you have book publishers like Macmillan having to issue formal apologies for writing revisionist history into the history books, basically saying that Black people, Africans who are stolen from their homeland and forced to work in slavery in the Americas for the entirety of their life and their children's lives and their children's lives, that these people were workers or immigrants, right? So they're trying to make this language more palatable to decrease the intensity of what happened and not tell a true history of the atrocities that were faced by African people and their descendants in America. But I argue that this book is written for the white gaze for two reasons. Number one was the inclusion of Dana's partner, Kevin, in the series. This same book could have been written if Dana's partner was Black. However, it was intentionally written for Kevin to be white. And I think on the one hand, it shows a juxtaposition of two people going back in time, one Black, one white, during slavery, and showing how different their circumstances were. And the funny thing about Kevin is he was dead broke when he came back. So because he was a white man, that elevated his place in society and put him on a pedestal, even though he didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, in comparison to Dana, who also came back and didn't know anybody there. So nobody should have assumed naturally that she was an enslaved person during this time period, because they didn't even know her, right? They didn't know if she was free or enslaved. And so the assumption that they had the ability and the right to commodify her and use her labor in this way was just wild anyway. But the juxtaposition makes sense. But like, whose heartstrings does that pull on? It don't pull on mine, okay? That pulls on like the white progressive, the white moderate who like needs to see the juxtaposition of this storyline. But it don't pull on mine because these are stories that I already know. Like, we already know the truth. The reason that we don't write time travel into a lot of our stories is because, unlike Back to the Future, when you send our Black selves back to the 1970s, the 1950s, to the Wild Wild West, okay? I'm looking at you, like Back to the Future #3. Like, we know what the situation was for Black people. We know that everything was not gravy, which is why so many of us lean into and towards Afrofuturism and creating a future world where we are free and have liberation, because we know in the past, that wasn't it. Someone from Dana's past, an ancestor, calls her back and asks for her help and is so close to dying. It's not a Black person. It's not her Black ancestor. It's her one white ancestor, Rufus. I just feel like that's laughable and comical to me. So you trying to tell me that Dana doesn't have any other ancestor in the past that needed her help? What about the ancestor that was snatched from Africa? What about the ancestor who had to make that voyage across the seas? What about the ancestor who was whipped, forced into slavery, into a place that they don't know, into a foreign land in a foreign country? Like, you telling me none of the people needed help, but this little white boy, Rufus, needed help. It's just, I feel like while this story was so well written, I didn't need to read it. And you know what? There's a reason that I didn't read Kindred before, right? Because I've read the synopsis before. This wasn't my first time ever hearing about Kindred, but of Octavia Butler's books, there's a reason that this was not the one I read, because I had no problem reading Wild Seed, even though there's like a lot of weird, dominant, oppressive forces and patriarchy in that book, which set that to the side. But like I've also read Parable of a Sower and Parable of Talents. So it's not like I've read nothing from Octavia Butler's catalog. So many more of Dana's ancestors needed to have one of their descendants teleport back in time to save them. And the fact that it was Rufus, I'm lost for words. And I never met another child in a story who was either more clumsy or trying to unalive themselves more, or had such vehement hatred for their parent that they're just willing to do anything. Like, I'm gonna just set the house on fire because I'm upset. Why? For what reason? One thing I do think that Kindred does well is provide a critique to all of those idiots who wore those shirts like "Not Your Grandmother's Protest," "Not Your Grandmother's Civil Rights Movement," "Not Your Grandmother's Liberation" a few years ago. And this book really provides detail that there's more than one way to resist. So resistance during that time could look like learning how to read, learning how to write, running away. But so many times those narratives of revolting and resistance are completely pushed to the side and are not taught to any of us in school. And so if you're not willing to do the additional research, you would think they never happened. In the larger scale revolts, like, okay, yes, we might have heard about Nat Turner, but I promise you there were many, many more revolts that just aren't written about in history books, because what winner wants to write about a battle that they almost lost? They don't want to do it. So you should assume that there was more. And so it was disrespectful for anybody to ever assume that you and the present generation are the first people to ever decide to resist or have liberation or whatever the case may be. This book also showed how easy it is to have your spirit broken on the inside. I think people don't understand how long slavery went for, how people had to watch their kids endure this, the sacrifices people will make for their offspring to try to keep their families together, and what self-preservation means. The will to resist can literally be beaten out of you. And Dana was such a good example of this, because Dana knew that she was not from this time period, but yet when she experienced the atrocities of being whipped and being beaten during that time period, she was ready to submit. She was ready to settle down. She was ready to have less of a ruckus. And she wasn't even dealing with it day in, day out for decades and decades and decades for the rest of their life. So my conclusion is this. If you have not read a lot of slave narratives and really gotten a deep dive into understanding the atrocities that Black people have faced during the transatlantic slave trade and during chattel slavery in America, then I think Kindred is definitely a book that you can pick up and read. The dialogue is great. The scene settings are amazing. It provides, I think, a really good contextual information for you to really get a sense where you can like use all your senses, sight, smell, touch, etc., to like be in that space and that time period. However, for me as a reader, I feel like there's enough trauma that I have to experience on the day-to-day basis in my present life. And so like I'm actually good off of some of these like trauma narratives that continue to be written. I would just say that I do plan on watching the miniseries, but I won't be binge watching it. I'm pretty sure that everything releases and it will be dropped later today. But for me and my sanity and my ability to make sure that like I don't fall into depression over Christmas when it's already super cold outside and people are already experiencing seasonal depression, it's not something that I'm gonna binge watch. And I would also suggest for other Black people, maybe don't binge watch it either. Watch an episode here and there, maybe once a week, but like don't do that to yourself. I don't think it's worth it. I think the depictions are gonna be horrific, and I think it's not worth it. All in all, y'all know I'm going to continue to read Octavia Butler. I hope you do too. But I mean, you know, pick this book up if you want to. I definitely think there's other Octavia Butler books that make more sense for you to read first. All right, y'all. Peace.